Narva had changed how Europe saw Charles XII. In a single winter battle, he had shattered a far larger Russian army. Denmark had already been forced out of the war. The young king was no longer underestimated. But the Great Northern War was far from over. To the south, Augustus the Strong still threatened Swedish Livonia. Across the wide Düna River outside Riga, Field Marshal Adam Heinrich von Steinau waited behind earthworks, redoubts, and guns. Nearly 20,000 Saxon and Russian troops held the far bank. 600 meters of open water protected them. They believed the river was enough. Charles intended to prove otherwise. For months, preparations moved forward in strict secrecy. Under Governor Erik Dahlberg, nearly 200 boats were gathered and built. Sections of a floating bridge were prepared. 4 floating gun platforms were ready to cover the crossing. Everything depended on timing. By early July 1701, the Swedish army reached Riga.
Välkommen till Riga, till ära. Tack, det är en stor ära att vara här.
The attack would come before dawn. All day on July 8th, Riga's fortress guns pounded the far shore. The bombardment continued into the night, a steady thunder rolling across the water. At around 9 in the evening, the embarkation began. In near silence, thousands of Swedish infantry moved down to the river and boarded the waiting craft. From the walls and church towers of Riga, civilians gathered to watch the dark water below. The short summer night began to fade. At 4 in the morning, the order was given. The boats pushed off. They slipped around the low islands and spread into a broad front across the river. For several long minutes, the enemy did not react. Then the alarm guns fired. Saxon artillery opened up. Cannonballs smashed into the water, throwing up white pillars in the half-light. Boats splintered. Men vanished into the current. But the Swedish guns answered. From the floating batteries, from field positions near Mühlenhof, and from Riga itself. The far bank disappeared into smoke and sparks. Burning craft were pushed into the current, drifting ahead of the main force. A moving wall of fire and haze that blinded the enemy gunners. Halfway across, Charles saw the danger. The Saxon line was forming fast. He ordered the boats straight toward the shore near the Garas redoubt. No hesitation, no delay. After a brutal crossing, the first Swedish soldiers reached the southern bank and splashed into the shallows. Charles XII came with them.
Se så mina bussar, nu är vi här och Gud ska nog hjälpa oss än längre.
Not behind the line, with the first wave. The Swedish formation was thin, wet, and exposed. It should have broken. Instead, it hardened. Pikes dropped forward. Spiked obstacles were thrown into place. Small regimental guns fired without pause. Then the counterattack came. Saxon cavalry surged forward, aiming to drive the Swedes back into the river before the bridgehead could form. The Swedes held their fire. They had been drilled for this. Wait. Hold. Until the enemy filled their sights. Then the line erupted. A devastating volley tore across the front. Horses collapsed mid-stride. Riders were hurled into the mud. The charge shattered in seconds. More attacks followed. Each time the Swedish line held and extended its grip on the shore. Under constant artillery cover, the Swedes stormed the Garas redoubt and secured the foothold. Now came the critical moment. Finish the bridge, bring over the cavalry, destroy Steinau's army. But the river fought back. Wind and current battered the floating bridge. Precious minutes slipped away. By 7 in the morning, Steinau ordered a disciplined withdrawal. The Swedes tried to pursue, but most of their cavalry was still stranded on the northern bank. Infantry ran as fast as men could run, but they could not catch a retreating army on horseback. Around 10 in the morning, the floating bridge was finally secured. Too late. The river had been crossed. The far bank was Swedish. Behind them, the Düna still churned with smoke and wreckage. Ahead of them, Steinau's army was already pulling away, bloodied but not destroyed. It was not the crushing annihilation Charles had hoped for, but the message was unmistakable. A fortified river, a prepared enemy, and still, the Swedes had forced their way across. Across Europe, officers and kings took notice. Narva had not been chance, and at the Düna, there was no storm to hide behind. This was planning. This was discipline. This was cold, deliberate aggression. In the space of a single year, Charles XII had transformed his army into one of the most feared instruments in Europe. And the war was far from finished. Because while the young king now turned his gaze south, far to the east, Russia was already learning, already rebuilding, and already preparing for the next encounter.